Hi, I'm Bill Bradley. Join me for a recent excerpt of American Voices. Think of a goal you have right now. How are you staying motivated to achieve it? How do you stay disciplined when you have setbacks? Even if you're not an athlete, you can learn a lot from our series on what makes a great coach. Here in American Voices, we've been talking to top sports coaches, and I'm very glad today that I'm joined by a coaching legend, Bill Cowher. Played in the NFL for 5 years, was coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers for 15 years, won a Super Bowl, and he was later inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and now he's a sports analyst for CBS and the author of the book, Heart and Steel. Coach Cowher, welcome to American Voices.
Thank you, Bill. It's great to be on here with you, and I always look forward to meeting with you on an annual basis and talking life, talking sports, and a lot of parallels.
Right. So tell us a little bit about growing up, your background. I understand your father had 3 rules that you took to heart.
Yeah, he did. And the rules are very simple. I said, number 1 is never quit. If you quit once, you'll quit again. So if I started something, he never allowed me to say that I don't like what I'm doing. You start something, you finish it. Number 2 is to work harder than the other person. So he talked to me about work ethic and talking about preparation. The number 3 was probably the most important thing, Bill, I think for all of us, is never be intimidated by anyone or anything. He taught me about having self-confidence in everything that I did. So I try to live by those rules every step of the way.
Yeah, on the wall here opposite my desk, I have a sign that says, "Don't give up." Sounds like your father.
Yeah, no, don't give up and don't be intimidated, and I think resiliency is a big part of life. Resiliency is a big part of trying to create a culture. Yes, we have perseverance, but perseverance means along the way, there's going to be some setbacks, and you got to be able to bounce back.
Right. Let's fast forward a little bit. You were an NFL player dealing with injury, and your NFL coach, Martin Schottenheimer, gave you an opportunity to coach. I mean, he coached the Browns, the Chiefs, the Redskins, the Chargers. What went through your mind when he said, you ought to be a coach? How did you decide to take that opportunity?
Well, it was interesting because, when I made the National Football League, I was never really a starter. I played 5 years, as you referenced, but those were 5 years as a special teams player, a backup player. And so I was always one of those guys, every year there was someone ready to take my role. So I was just trying to make the team. And, I played for Marty in Cleveland, and then I got traded to the Philadelphia Eagles. He said, Cowher, you're pretty smart and you're tough. That someday, if I ever get to become a head coach, I'm going to hire you. And I said, okay, well, we'll see. And I always did even when I was playing back in the early 80s. I was a substitute teacher in the off season, and I just thought about coaching. And really my first indoctrination into coaching, Bill, was interesting enough, is I got cut by the Philadelphia Eagles in 79. And I went down and got back into school with Bo Ryan as a GA for the first time. Got my degree and made it the next year. But that year as a GA, being at NC State, it was really the first time I said, I get a coach like Robert Abraham, good inside linebacker, better than I was. And then he kind of played behind me the last couple of years, but he's a bigger, faster. So I started talking about what to look for, the things that you can do, your footwork, too many false steps. So the little idiosyncrasies of playing that position, and you couple that with a very good athlete, I find myself having some impact on his performance. And he's like, gosh, thank you for all these little things. I said, yeah, all the things I wouldn't tell you when I was playing with you because I didn't want you to beat me out. So I said, but that was the first time that I really enjoyed teaching. And so when Marty called me back up, and I got hurt in '84, and he became a head coach. He says, "You want to come and be a special teams coach?" And he says, "What are you going to make next year?" I said, "Well, I think I'm going to make about $150,000. But I just signed a contract. I was a special teams captain." He goes, "Well, I'll tell you what. You're going to work 3 times more and make 3 times less. I'll offer you $50,000, and you can be a special teams coach." And he says, "Oh yeah, by the way, let me know by Friday. I'll talk to you then." And he hung up. I go, so much for negotiations. I said but you know what? It was something I always wanted to do, and I never got into coaching for money. I got into coaching because I like teaching. I love sports. I love the strategy of football. It's kind of like chess. It's not checkers. And so it was just a passion of mine, and the opportunity to come and not go through college or high school or be a grad assistant. I was able to start right at the very beginning at the highest of levels as a special teams coach. And I guess, as you would say, from there, the rest is history.
So there you were a player, 5 years, and you leave playing behind. How did you deal with that?
I was great with that, Bill. You know,
You never had withdrawal, right? Because some guys, they
no.
can never make the transition.
Well, and I think, great players like yourself, and I always said this before, and I coached a bunch of them. The longer you play, the harder it is to walk away. And so I was only, I mean, it really is because the longer you play, you've proven yourself to being one of the better players in the arena that you're in. And that's hard for people to sit there and say they still can't do it. I was never the best player in the gym. I remember you told me one time, if you're the best player in the gym, you go find a better gym. So,
Yeah.
you always want to have, you got to find a better gym. So, I mean, you never want to be, right. So, and I think that I never knew I was never going to be the best player in the gym, but I wanted to be in the gym. And I knew that my role was probably a lot more, had a lot more longevity as a coach than certainly I did as a player.
That's for sure. The average life of an NFL player is what, 5 or 6 years?
No, it's actually like 3.5. So 3. I actually exceeded that. Yeah. Yeah. I just have loved coaching. I love strategizing. And I've said this before. To me, coaches are teachers. And I got a degree in education at NC State. And, you have to understand your players like you have to understand your students. What's their retention ability? What's your skill set? What can you do to put them in the best possible position? And that's what coaching is to me. You're a teacher.
Well, but you never coached before. How'd you go about learning how to coach and how to find your coaching style? And what made it special?
I think I took a lot from the people that I played under, from my high school coach, Bill Yost in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Lou Holtz recruited me. I watched him sit in front of a team and bringing a team together. Then there was Bo Ryan. Then I went to San Ritigliano with the
you had some good
Browns.
Models.
Yeah, Dick Vermeil, and I played and coached. I played under Marty Schottenheimer, and so I watched. When I went back as a special teams coach, I was with Marty for 7 years. 2 as a special teams coach, 2 coaching DBs. When Marty got fired, I went with him to Kansas City, became a coordinator. So I watched him. I watched around the league and watched guys like Bill Parcells. I watched Bill Belichick. So I think I learned a lot just by watching other people, how they deal with the media, how they deal with certain situations that become, player issues that you have at times on the field, off the field, being able to really delegate your time and being able to have time management in terms of all the responsibilities you have.
What do you mean player situations?
Well, I mean, just, off the field, guys I a lot of times I felt like I was a therapist. I mean, I would pull players in and talk. I swear, I actually, in one situation, I brought the wife and the player in and sat down and talked to him. I said, I feel like I was my marriage counselor here because, I always thought that a player, if he's not good at home, he's not going to be good at work. We're with these guys a lot. During the season, they come in at 8 o'clock in the morning. We're with them till 5 o'clock at night. We're spending a lot of time with them. They're with us. Then they're with the players. Sometimes they meet after practice. And so, I wanted to make sure that they were good at home, that they were sitting there and, how's your wife? How's your family? Is your parents coming in for this game? So that to me was just very, very important to know how they were personally, because if they know, if they're solid and they're stable personally, I know I'll get the best out of them professionally.
So you've said that some players need to be encouraged. And
yes.
Some players need to be yelled at.
Yes.
I'll tell you a little story. 1973, we were playing the Boston Celtics, Game 6, right at 3, playing in Madison Square Garden, 6th game, and we lose, which we should have won, but we lost. And it's now 3-3. And the president of the Knicks comes in and he tells us, he's ashamed of us, that we had thrown it all away. We didn't have a chance to win the 7th game in Boston. Well, we won the 7th game in Boston, in part because of that speech, right? So how do you decide what player you shout at, what player you encourage? I mean, that speech told you a lot about some and what they'd give up. So how do you know about what player to shout at and what player to encourage?
That's the key. I think that's what good teachers can do. I have said this to them. I will treat you all fairly, but I'm not going to treat you all the same. So there were some people that, I needed my good players to play great, and I needed my players, other role players, to play good. So I needed to know who they were. So I would try to identify that. I always thought this too. I never tried to individualize any one player. So I used to talk to our team a lot, and I used to say my whole thing with the team was, you know, you're never as good as you think you are. You're never as bad as they say you are. It's never as good as it appears, never as bad as it seems. And so I just think it's very, very important as I think about coaching. When we were up, I brought them down. And I sat there and said, you know what? I would kick them off the field sometimes. I just didn't want them to get too high in themselves. So I was trying to keep that seesaw right kind of in the middle and handling all the emotional parts of that as a football team. And I think that's probably the one thing, you know, in football, you're talking to 53 guys every time you go into a meeting. So there's so many different roles. There's 22 starters. There's a couple of kickers. There's role players that you have. So I really try to keep a lot of it very general in speaking and didn't try to individualize it. Now, some players, if they didn't want to get singled out, but I'd have to talk to them, I would pull them in before the meeting and say, listen, I have to pull this out. You were loafing on this play. And how you respond will have a lot to do with your, you know, how you're going to impact this team. And I can't have that. Guy would say, I got you, coach. I got you. I said, well, I'm calling you out. You okay? He goes, I'm okay. I'm okay. But thank you for letting me know you're going to do it. So I didn't want to embarrass a player, but sometimes you have to push a player. And some guys, I didn't have to pull them in. Some guys were just, they got too comfortable. And I think that's the biggest thing to me is I used to say this, Bill, get comfortable being uncomfortable. I'm going to make you uncomfortable because that's the only way to me, you'll be the very best you can do.
But what does that mean? What does that mean, guys get?
It means I think you get comfortable because, okay, I've made it. I'm good. No, you can still be better. But I also wanted to make sure that we had the ability that no matter what happened, circumstance-wise, in the course of the game, that we weren't going to get uncomfortable and lose our poise. Poise is about being comfortable in uncomfortable situations. And so that's my definition of that.
That's a good saying. I'll tell you that. Be comfortable in uncomfortable situations. I guess that's partly what a champion has.
Yes. And that's because you know what? Sometimes it gets uncomfortable because of all the expectation that's placed on you. But get comfortable with that. It's okay. It's okay.
Right. Do any stories come to mind of players who were difficult to reach and yet you handled it? How did you reach them?
I think there was a player that one time that I had in Kansas City, and I always remember this. When I first started out, I was a defensive coordinator, and I didn't like the fact he was not running to the ball in practice. So I had to film. I went back and forth and just said, listen, we run to the football. He wouldn't respond. And so I actually turned it off, and I says, listen, hey, I says, I told you to run to the ball. I said, you're not even saying a word. I said, do you have a problem? And he looked up at me, his veins coming out of his neck. He goes, I ain't got an effing problem. Do you have an effing problem? I go, nope, no problem here. Just want to make sure we're on the same page. I said, so you know what? I realize you don't back players into a corner and you don't make them in a situation where you embarrass them. Now, being uncomfortable is one thing, but don't embarrass them. And so I learned from that time moving forward that when you're trying to correct them and you're trying to coach them, there are certain guys that they get mad. There's other guys that they want, oh, you're right. So it's getting to know your players and getting to know what makes them tick, what is their retention ability, and don't ask them to do things they can't do. And so that's the biggest thing for me was just trying to find out what that skill set was where I can get the best out of this player.
I think that's the key, really. People don't realize, you have the coach that does the same speech every year, every team, everything. And then the coach that figures out who these players are and figures individual ways in to motivate them. And that's, from my perspective, and I think you'd say too, is definitely the best way.
It is. Like someone says, what do players want? To me, there's three things. If you're going to go into coaching, to me is what players want. Number one is they want structure. You know this as well as anyone being a player. You'd love to know what the routine, you want to get into a routine. I mean, we all are like products of routine. We want to know exactly where I'm going to be, the game day, what's the day before game day, what's the shoot around going to be, Wednesday we're going to do this, Thursday. So they want to have some degree of structure. With practice starts at this time and you start at this time. Meetings start at this time. They want structure. The second thing they want is direction. And I think that's the thing that you have to be able to do is build credibility with your systems, with the approach that you take, the direction, how you're going to orient and get these guys to build up to a game plan every week. So they want to know that the plan you're giving them has been successful. So earning the credibility early for a young coach is the most important thing, which I think to me is why the game of football is so uniquely different than a lot of other things, because there's so many different ways of getting it done. And being flexible in your approach to having that sense of direction is very, very important, because every year your team can change. And you got to be able to cater systems to your players and not try to put players into your system. So, and the last thing is accountability. So I always says accountability begins with yourself, but holding people accountable, I think that's one thing that all the players want. They want to make sure everyone else is being held accountable, just like you're holding that person accountable.
Those are the big three.
Structure, direction, accountability. That's it.
So, Bill, tell me about a high point and a low point in your coaching career. I guess the high point is Super Bowl champion.
Yeah, it doesn't get any better than that. And I think the low point for me, ironically enough, was the year before, because the year before we were 15-1 and we lost to the Patriots in the championship game. It was a fourth championship game loss that I had with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So, you hear the mumblings. Oh, he's a good coach, but he can't win the big one. Can't win the big one. And so, you hear it, and I'm thinking, you know what? If that's who I am, that's who I am. All I know is I've given you everything I've had every year. And for whatever reason, we keep falling short of getting there. And then the following year, we get there. And so it's almost like one of those things, like when we won it, it's like I almost felt like, I was waiting for us to lose it, because I feel like every time I got to this game, the last game, something was going to happen. I mean, 3 interceptions against the Dallas Cowboys and the one Super Bowl, and then I lose 4 championship games in Pittsburgh. The year we go into the Super Bowl, we were on the road the entire time. So I said, maybe I was better off being on the road than playing at home.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting point there, but you didn't give up on yourself or your team. I mean, losing 4 in a row, and you still came back and you wanted to win, and you did. And that kind of dedication is really, I think, part of what makes champions. It
is. And I think you talk about the same thing. It's having that resiliency, right? It's just that to me is that's a part of what you're trying to build in terms of culture, is that sense of perseverance, that sense of resiliency, that like not to let any one thing define who you are. And every year you have a chance to redefine who you are. And so we were not going to be defined as losers. We're going to be defined as fighters, and sometimes you get knocked down, but you know what? Don't dwell in self-pity, get back up, and let's just go at it again. And we're going to be that Freddy Krueger that you just keep trying to knock down and kill, but we keep coming back.
There's more of my conversation with Coach Bill Cowher, plus 2 strangers from different sides of the political aisle in search of common ground.
What are you most hopeful about? That we recognize that we are all Americans?
It's coming up next. You're listening to American Voices. I'm Bill Bradley. Stay with us. I'm Bill Bradley. We're back now on American Voices. We're continuing my conversation with Coach Bill Cowher. He coached the Pittsburgh Steelers for 15 years, was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2020, and he's now a sports analyst for CBS and the author of the book, Heart and Steel. We're talking about what it means to be a coach. So, Coach Cowher, tell us a story about how you grew as a coach.
Number one, I went back as a special teams coach and loved special teams. I had a guy named Frank Gantz who was coaching me in Philadelphia Eagles, and I learned so much from him. And I was like one of the guys. I was back there coaching guys I played with like 2 years earlier. So I'd run up and down the field, had a lot of energy. Then Marty moved me into coaching the secondary, and I've never even played the secondary. So now I'm coaching a really good secondary with the Cleveland Browns, guys that I had played with a couple years earlier as a linebacker and special teams player. You're like, you're going to tell us about defensive back play? I go, yes, I am. So I had to learn, and I remember learning from Larry Weaver a guy that Marty introduced me to. He says, go spend a weekend with Larry Weaver. So I had to learn all about defensive back play, footwork, drills, angles that you have to talk about, what you're looking at from a free safety standpoint, how you play bump and run, how you play off, how you play in the slot. So I learned that. Then I went to Kansas City and I got to become the linebacker coach and the coordinator. And I was out there with Tony Dungy. Tony actually was my defensive back coach at the time, and Tom Pratt. And we were with Marty. And, Marty made sure everything was sound. So I grew as a coach, making sure that we covered everything. What if this back comes out? Okay. So we had to make sure we put any defense in that no matter what they threw at us, that we had covered it. Whether it's a motion, whether it was a shift, whatever it may have been, Marty Schottenheimer, his attention to detail and his preparation, second to none. So I learned that from him. I learned about preparation, what to look for when you're watching tape. I go in there and I go back when I was in Pittsburgh, my first couple of years as a head coach. I'd come in the morning, Rod Woodson being there looking at tape. So I said, you know what? I'm just curious what great players. He's a Hall of Fame corner. So I go in there and I just sit behind him. He goes, "Hey, coach." I go, "No." I go, "Keep doing what you're doing." I go, do me one thing. What are you looking at? Just tell me what you're looking at. Okay, well, I'm looking at his feet. And look at his stance. See how he's crouched over? Because if he crouches over this certain way, when he's leaning like this, he's probably going to come out of that thing, and he's actually going to probably make a left or right cut early. He's more upright. It's probably going to be more of a vertical route that he's running. And look
that
at
is
his
amazing.
Split.
That detail.
I know. Right, to that detail. And the outside linebacker, Greg Lloyd, what are you looking at? Derek Thomas, look at the knuckles of the tackle. What do you mean, knuckles of the tackle? Yeah, look. He's putting no pressure on that. It's a pass set. Look at him now. Now look at him on the run. Look at him. I can see the redness. He's getting down in the stance. He's got to get underneath the lineman. It's going to be a run. So it's like, okay, so now you're looking at knuckles. I'm looking at knuckles and looking at the back of someone standing up. So I'm like, the idiosyncrasies of the game. And that's the beauty. Those are the little things that if you can help a player with. Look at this. See the triangle. What's a triangle? That's the center and the two guards. Don't just look at the guard. You got to see the triangle. See it. It's a peripheral thing. You'll see two guys going down, one guy going across. You're going to start to see combinations of blocks if you can open up your vision. That's going to allow you to get there one step sooner. And in the National Football League, one step sooner is the difference between making a tackle or missing one.
That's incredible, Bill. Incredible. And so true. I mean, it's always the nuance, the small thing that the average player overlooks or doesn't know and champion sees.
Well, but there's also the preparation. And I go back to yours, the run that the show that you had, and the opening up in Kansas. Dribble, 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 shoot. Dribble, 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 shoot. Dribble, 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 shoot. I'm like, and the whole thing to me, my whole takeaway was repetitive. You were repetitive. You were creating a habit.
Yeah. You begin by bouncing a ball in the backyard or playground.
Bounce. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And that's where habits. I created a word by habitize yourself. What do you mean habitize yourself? Make it a habit. Like running to the football is a habit. Trying to strip it from the quarterback is a habit. You shouldn't have to think. If you have to think about it, it's too late. So it's the same thing. And it's just the repetitive practice that you did as a kid in Kansas. And you probably went back and getting ready for that 7th game against the Boston Celtics. You're thinking about, okay, it's just the kid in Kansas, right? Dribble, 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 shoot. And we're not losers.
Yeah, exactly. So tell me a moment, an athlete, a player that you were proudest of in any kind of situation, whether it's injury or brilliance or pressure. Does anyone come to mind?
I think of Hines Ward. And I think Hines Ward came in there as a 3rd-round pick. He covered kicks for me, and for like his first 3 years, he was a role player. We're drafting him, Troy Edwards, we're trying Plexico Burrs. He didn't think we trusted him. He had this monumental chip on his shoulder, and I know it was because he never thought I really trusted him as a receiver. I thought I was a backup, and he was one of the toughest guys in the world. And he epitomized what a Steeler was. And I was just so proud of him for never to kind of take that chip and just use it as you know what, he'd look at me, he goes, you happy now? He'd catch 10 passes. You think you're going to go draft a receiver next year? I'm going, I go, and so I actually play, I go, I'm still thinking about it. I'm still thinking about it. I don't, so I loved him. I loved Jerome Bettis. Jerome Bettis at the end of his career, Bill, he came in a big time trade for us from the Rams, became an integral part in his 10 years with us from 96 to 2006. We lost championship games. We had great teams. He came back, took less pay, had a lesser of a role. And yet, when that last game was played in Detroit, where his hometown was, he's the one that ran on that field by himself. So the impact that a role player made at the end of his career speaks volumes for what he was able to bring to that locker room.
Right. And that's never seen by anybody but the team.
Yes, correct. And you could see the team when they all wore his jersey as they went back to Detroit, his Notre Dame 36 bus jersey.
Yeah, what a great story. Growing up, I think athletes love their sport. I mean, I clearly did. You did. But, they get to be professional athletes, their endorsements, politics, criticism, etc. Do you ever find athletes that started to lose their love of the game? And how did you help them get their love back?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Bill. Particularly, I think when you look at the professional level, because sometimes you just wonder if they're doing it because they're expected to do it. Do they really love the game? I tried to make it fun. I mean, I really never wanted them to lose, and to be honest with you, it really was an individual call. And I think at every beginning of every training camp, I would say this: it's not for everybody. This game is not for everybody. We're about winning, and I'm about holding people accountable. I'm about maybe trying to make you a little bit uncomfortable to make you be the very best you can. But there's no greater sense of joy than to come together with a group of individuals to do something that no one else thinks you can do. I said, at the end of the day, to achieve something that's very, very unique and special, it does take sacrifice. It takes commitment. It takes resiliency. It takes perseverance. All the things that at the end of the day, you're going to find out in life, those are the same qualities you're going to do with everything else you do. So you have to have an ability to compartmentalize it. I know that we're all different here. There were single guys. There were guys who had 3 kids. There was guys that were 36 playing with guys that were 20. So, there was a lot of different individuals. It wasn't like a group of college kids we're all in the same classes or high school. We're all the same age. No, these were different ages, different upbringings. You think about what they're making comparison-wise, what their role is on your team. And to be able to come in there and to together create a bond, stronger and stronger each week. And at the very end of it, you like to think that by the time that last game comes, you are not just a team, you're a family that's committed to one another.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I give you an example of that. In the 7th game of the Eastern Finals in 1971 against Baltimore, we called a play for Frazier, Bill Walt Frazier. The ball went to him. He was double teamed. He threw it to me. I took a dribble to the corner, took a shot. Wes Unseld nicked it, and we lost the game by 1 point. And afterwards, strangers for 20 years would say, why did you miss that last shot against Baltimore in 1971?
Oh.
But my teammates never said one word.
Right.
So
right.
How do you get teammates to avoid blaming each other and complaining about other players?
I think it starts with the head coach. I think the head coach, I never singled out players. I would, if I did anything, I would single out units, offense versus defense. And it wasn't even singling them out or blaming them. Sometimes we're going to have to win a game that's in the 30s. Sometimes we're going to have to win a game that's in the teens. And obviously for those particular games, one side of the ball was playing better than the other, or one side of the ball was not playing as good as the other. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be able to complement it. And you realize that sometimes, the ball's going to bounce a different way. The ball's not going to go in the hoop. But we all understand that we all care. There's a commitment There's a sacrifice. There's a passion that we have for this game because we're committed to it, that we have to just trust what the results will be. And so I'm about effort, I'm about preparation, and I think the results are a byproduct of all that.
The Pittsburgh Steelers were an unusual team because they had the same owner for years and years and years, Dan Rooney. What did Dan Rooney teach you?
Dan Rooney was a very simple man, and I think he taught me a lot about humility. He grew up 2 blocks from Three River Stadium in the north side, never changed. That's where he grew up. People would come out for tickets. He'd give them pizzas. Everybody waiting in line for it. And when you came into work every day, he would talk to you. And he always was a guy that he'd talk about your family. How's your family doing? How's your parents doing? Then we'd talk about, what do you think about the game this week? I think we're good. He goes, okay, I'm sure we are. But he was more about that we had a culture, we had a building that was unified, that was close. There was transparency. Yes, he held people accountable, but there was transparency. There was collaboration. We had disagreements, but it was like a family. We didn't always agree with one another, but when we came out of it, we came out with one decision that represented our football team. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of the way it was with everything we did in that building was, we represent the Pittsburgh Steelers. We're blue collar. We're selfless. We give back to the community. We're proud of being from Pittsburgh. There's a responsibility that comes with being a Pittsburgh Steeler, which I made sure I mentioned every year when we come in there. It's a big little city, and you're a role model whether you like it or not. So anything you do, use your platform to make a difference in the community, and just do it by doing one thing. Display these things: humility, sacrifice, and empathy. Just think about humility, sacrifice, and empathy. If you do those 3 things and you use your platform, you're going to make a difference in someone's life. And I really, really believe that. And don't ever diminish who you're talking to and when you're talking to them.
That's great advice. I mean, football teaches values, and these values are not unique to football, right? You can learn them in other sports, but they're human values. And
I'm with you every year at the Allen & Company conference, and I go out there and I see all the great leaders in every industry and the movers and the people that are influencing the world today. And you see a lot of the same things that you see when you sit there and coach a football team. You see talent, you see empathy, commitment, you see passion, all the things that we talk about in sports, all the things that you grew up and the things that you have taken from the basketball court to your political career. There are all some of these identical qualities and traits that we all have, but ultimately it comes down to, how important is it to you and how committed can you be to it?
Yeah, that's for sure. You said that losing a league championship is harder than losing the Super Bowl. But that raises the issue, what is it like to lose a big game? And do you have any tips for both players and fans in dealing with loss or setbacks?
So I think the biggest thing for me when you get into the big games is, number one, that I've learned from, I know I lost a lot of them, was have no regrets. Don't be afraid to think outside the box. Take chances. We did a lot of different things at times in playoff games, and I just don't want to sit there when it's all said and done that I didn't take a chance, whether it's making a change at quarterback, whether it's making a change at the position. I just want to make sure I turned over every stone in trying to win those games. And I think in doing so, you have to let whatever happens, happen. I just not till you're done. When you're in the middle of a great run, you don't sit there and reflect, and you don't dwell on where you're headed. You stay in the moment, stay in the now. And I think that's the biggest thing I would say to people in the middle of doing something. Is you don't reflect, don't ponder the future. Stay where you're at, because those are the things that are keeping you to doing the same thing.
Great advice. Listen, Bill, thanks so much for everything you've done for the game, and thanks for telling us what truly means to be a coach and sharing these life stories as well as football stories.
Well, thank you, Bill. And I honestly can say that your story, your personal story, is very inspirational to a lot of people. I know it's been to me, and having a chance to see it and hear you talk about it, you've made quite a contribution to our society. And I want to thank you for being you.
Well, thank you very much, Bill. I'm right back at you. I've been speaking with legendary coach Bill Cowher. He coached the Pittsburgh Steelers for 15 years, won a Super Bowl, included in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Now he's a sports analyst for CBS and the author of the book, Heart and Steel. To find out more, visit us on Facebook. Our page is American Voices with Senator Bill Bradley. And we're also now on Instagram, and I hope you check us out there too. Our Instagram page is Bill Bradley on Sirius XM. Write me your thoughts on anything you've heard today. Follow us. Thank you for listening to American Voices here on my YouTube channel. For more interviews celebrating the goodness and creativity of the American people, click the subscribe button below.